The sound of metal hitting concrete echoed through the training facility as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez caught the rifle thrown at her feet. The weapon was old, scratched, and obviously damaged. Around her, male soldiers smirked and whispered among themselves. They had no idea they were looking at someone who would soon rewrite the rules of elite military operations. "Think you can handle that, Rodriguez?" called out one of the instructors, his voice dripping with doubt. "It's all we have left." Maria picked up the rifle, her calloused hands running over its surface. She could feel every scratch, every dent, every imperfection. But what the men around her couldn't see was the fire burning in her eyes. The same fire that had driven her from a small Texas town to the most elite military training in the world. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. This was about showing them that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the gun, it's the person holding it. What happened next would shock everyone in that room and change the course of military history forever. Because Maria Rodriguez was about to demonstrate that when you've spent your life fighting for respect, a broken weapon is just another obstacle to overcome. And she was very, very good at overcoming obstacles. Maria Rodriguez learned to fight before she learned to read properly. Growing up in Laredo, Texas, in a neighborhood where respect was earned with your fists and your word was your bond, she quickly discovered that being small didn't mean being weak. Her father, Miguel, worked double shifts at the auto repair shop, coming home with oil-stained hands and stories about fixing things that everyone else had given up on. "Mija," he would tell her as she watched him work on old cars in their driveway, "everything can be fixed if you know where to look and you're willing to put in the work." People, too. Maria took those words to heart, especially when the kids at school started calling her names for wearing secondhand clothes and carrying her lunch in a paper bag instead of a proper lunchbox. When Tommy Martinez pushed her down during recess and called her father a greaser, Maria didn't cry. She got up, dusted off her knees, and hit him so hard that he fell backward into the monkey bars. The principal called her mother that day, but instead of punishment, Maria found herself sitting across from her father at the kitchen table while he cleaned her scraped knuckles with peroxide. "You stood up for your family," Miguel said, his voice quiet but proud. "That's good. But fighting should be your last choice, not your first. You understand?" Maria nodded, but inside she felt something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. She liked the feeling of not backing down. She liked knowing she could protect herself and the people she loved. As Maria grew older, that fighting spirit transformed into something more focused. She joined the high school ROTC program, where Sergeant Williams, a veteran of the Gulf War, saw something special in the quiet girl who never missed a drill and always volunteered for the hardest assignments. "Rodriguez," he said one day after she had completed a particularly challenging obstacle course, "you ever think about making this your career?" Maria had been thinking about it for months. College seemed impossible with her family's financial situation, and the military offered something she craved, a chance to prove herself on a level playing field where performance mattered more than where you came from. But when she mentioned it to her friends, they laughed. When she told her boyfriend, Carlos, he shook his head and said, "Baby, that's not for girls like us. Why don't you think about nursing or teaching?" That night, Maria lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to her parents argue about money in the kitchen. Her mother's voice was tired, strained from working 2 jobs and still struggling to make ends meet. Her father's voice was frustrated, the weight of being unable to provide weighing heavy on his shoulders. Maria made her decision that night. She would join the army not just to escape her circumstances, but to become something more than anyone expected her to be. When she announced her decision at dinner the next night, the reaction was mixed. Her mother cried, worried about her daughter's safety. Her father sat quietly for a long time before reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "If this is what you want," he said, "then you make us proud. You show them what Rodriguez women are made of." The recruitment office in downtown Laredo was a small, cramped space with faded posters on the walls showing soldiers in action. Staff Sergeant Johnson, the recruiter, was a tall man with kind eyes who listened patiently as Maria explained her goals. "I want to be infantry," Maria said, her voice steady and determined. Sergeant Johnson paused, his pen hovering over the paperwork. "Maria, that's not really open to women. Have you considered military police? Or maybe communications?" "I want infantry," Maria repeated, meeting his eyes. I want to be where the action is. It was 2015, and the military was just beginning to open combat roles to women. Sergeant Johnson explained the challenges, the physical requirements, the fact that she would be one of the first women to attempt many of these programs. It's going to be hard, he warned her. Harder than you can imagine. A lot of people are going to want you to fail. Maria smiled, thinking about Tommy Martinez and the monkey bars, about all the people who had told her what she couldn't do. Let them want, she said. I'll be too busy succeeding to notice. Basic training at Fort Benning was everything Sergeant Johnson had warned her about and more. From the moment she stepped off the bus, Maria felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on her. She was one of only 3 women in her company, and the drill sergeants made it clear that they had doubts about whether any of them belonged there. Drill Sergeant Hayes was a mountain of a man with a voice that could shatter glass and a stare that seemed to see right through your soul. During the first week, he pulled Maria aside after a particularly brutal day of physical training. Rodriguez, he said, his voice surprisingly quiet, I've seen a lot of recruits come through here. Most of them are here because they don't know what else to do with their lives. But you're different. You're here for a reason. Maria stood at attention, sweat dripping down her face, every muscle in her body aching from the day's exercises. Yes, Drill Sergeant. The question is, Hayes continued, are you tough enough to see it through? Because I'm going to push you harder than I push anyone else. Not because I don't like you, but because the enemy won't go easy on you. Because you're a woman. If you're going to do this job, you need to be better than good. You need to be exceptional. That conversation became Maria's driving force through the hellish weeks that followed. When other recruits were struggling with the physical demands, Maria was exceeding them. When they complained about the heat during the Georgia summer, Maria pushed herself to run faster and longer. When they talked about quitting during the toughest moments, Maria was studying tactics and weapons manuals by flashlight after lights out. But it wasn't just the physical challenges that tested her. It was the constant whispers, the sideways glances, the feeling that she had to prove herself every single day. Some of the male recruits resented her presence, feeling that the standards were being lowered to accommodate women. Others tried to protect her, which was almost worse because it implied she needed protection. Private Collins was the worst of the lot. A big farm boy from Alabama. With old-fashioned ideas about women's roles, he made it his personal mission to make Maria's life miserable. He would accidentally bump into her during drills, make snide comments about women in combat, and generally try to get under her skin. The breaking point came during Week 8, during a field exercise designed to test the recruits' ability to work as a team under pressure. Collins deliberately gave Maria wrong information about their objective, causing her team to fail the exercise spectacularly. That night, as the other recruits slept, Maria confronted Collins outside the barracks. We need to talk, she said, her voice calm but dangerous. Collins smirked. What's wrong, sweetheart? Can't handle a little competition? What happened next became the stuff of legend among her fellow recruits. Maria didn't raise her voice, didn't throw a punch, didn't lose her temper. Instead, she challenged Collins to a one-on-one combat exercise the next day, with the entire company watching. You think I don't belong here, she said. Prove it. Drill Sergeant Hayes heard about the challenge and, after considering it for a moment, decided to allow it. He understood that sometimes respect had to be earned the hard way. The next day, as the sun rose over the Georgia pine trees, the entire company gathered in a circle around the makeshift fighting area. Collins was bigger, stronger, and had reach on Maria. But Maria had something he didn't have. A lifetime of learning to overcome disadvantages through intelligence, strategy, and sheer determination. The fight lasted less than 3 minutes. Maria used Collins' size against him, staying mobile, striking quickly, and using techniques she had learned from watching her father wrestle with his brothers at family gatherings. When it was over, Collins was on the ground, and Maria was standing over him, not even breathing hard. Do we have an understanding now? She asked, extending her hand to help him up. Collins stared at her for a long moment before taking her hand and getting to his feet. Yeah, he said quietly, we have an understanding. From that day forward, Maria was just another soldier in the company. Not the woman who was trying to prove herself, not the girl who didn't belong, but Private Rodriguez, who could outshoot most of her peers and outthink all of them. When graduation day came, Maria stood in formation with the rest of her company. her dress blue uniform crisp and perfect, her boots polished to a mirror shine. Her parents had driven all the way from Texas to watch her receive her certificate and her first assignment. Drill Sergeant Hayes pulled her aside after the ceremony. "Rodriguez," he said, "I've got some news for you. Your test scores, your performance evaluations, everything, it's all off the charts. You've got an opportunity here that doesn't come along very often." Maria waited, her heart pounding. "There's a special operations unit that's looking for recruits. It's new, experimental, and they specifically want women who can handle the pressure. It's not going to be easy, and there's no guarantee you'll make it through the selection process. But if you do..." He didn't need to finish. Maria knew what he was offering, a chance to be part of something bigger, something that could change not just her life, but the way the military thought about women in combat. "Where do I sign up?" she asked. As Maria packed her belongings that night, preparing for the next phase of her journey, she thought about the conversation with her father all those years ago. Everything could be fixed, he had said, if you knew where to look and were willing to put in the work. Maria was ready to put in the work. She just had no idea how much work it would take, or how many people would try to break her before she had the chance to prove what she was really made of. The bus that would take her to her next assignment left at dawn. As Maria climbed aboard, she carried with her the hopes of everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, everyone who had ever been underestimated, everyone who had ever refused to accept that their dreams were too big for their circumstances. She also carried something else, a quiet confidence that whatever came next, she would find a way to overcome it. After all, she was Maria Rodriguez from Laredo, Texas, and she had never backed down from a fight in her life. The facility looked like something out of a science fiction movie. Located in a classified location that Maria was told never to discuss, it sprawled across hundreds of acres of desert landscape, hidden behind layers of security that made Fort Knox look like a convenience store. As the unmarked bus pulled through the final checkpoint, Maria could see training obstacles that defied imagination. Massive walls, rope courses that stretched between buildings, and what looked like an entire mock city complete with aircraft and vehicles. "Welcome to hell, ladies and gentlemen," announced the instructor who met them at the bus room. He was a compact man with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the 24 recruits stepping off the transport. "I'm Colonel Morrison, and for the next 8 weeks I will determine whether you have what it takes to join the most elite fighting force the world has ever seen." Maria looked around at her fellow candidates, 23 men and her. Some looked like they had been carved from granite, with muscles bulging under their uniforms and the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of physical dominance. Others were leaner, with the sharp intelligence of engineers and tacticians. All of them looked at her with varying degrees of skepticism, curiosity, and in some cases, barely concealed hostility. The first week was designed to break them. Physical training that made basic training look like a warm-up. Intellectual challenges that pushed their minds to the breaking point, and psychological evaluations that probed their deepest fears and motivations. By day 3, 2 candidates had quit. By the end of the week, they were down to 18. Maria wasn't the strongest candidate, but she was proving to be one of the most resourceful. During a navigation exercise through the desert, when other candidates were struggling with the traditional map and compass method, Maria used the position of the stars and the growth patterns of desert plants to find her way back to base camp hours ahead of schedule. "How did you know to do that?" asked Thompson, a former Marine who had become one of the few candidates to show her any respect. "My grandfather used to take me camping when I was little," Maria explained as they walked back to the barracks. "He grew up poor in Mexico and said you never knew when you might need to find your way home without any help." Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "Smart man." "He was," Maria agreed. "He also told me that the people who survive aren't always the strongest or the fastest. They're the ones who pay attention to details that others miss." It was advice that served her well as the weeks progressed and the challenges became more complex. While other candidates focused on brute force solutions, Maria found elegant ways to overcome obstacles that required less strength but more creativity. During a building assault exercise, while her teammates tried to blast through a heavily fortified door, Maria noticed a ventilation shaft that led directly into the target room. Her approach not only succeeded, but did so without alerting the simulated enemies to their presence. The instructors began to take notice. Colonel Morrison, who had seemed skeptical of her presence initially, started calling on her during tactical briefings. Captain Williams, the marksmanship instructor, pulled her aside after a shooting exercise where she had outscored everyone except one other candidate. "Rodriguez," he said, examining her target. "You're a natural. Have you considered specializing in precision shooting?" Maria looked at the tight grouping of holes in the center of the target, barely wider than a quarter. She had always been a good shot, but something about the military weapons felt different, more precise, more responsive to her touch. "I've thought about it, sir," she admitted. "Good," Williams said, "because I think you have the potential to be exceptional at it. There's a selection process coming up for a very specialized unit. Interested?" Before Maria could answer, the alarm klaxon began blaring across the compound. Emergency assembly. The remaining 18 candidates rushed to the parade ground, where Colonel Morrison was waiting with an expression that made Maria's stomach clench. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "you're about to face your final test. In 12 hours, you will be dropped into a combat scenario that will test everything you've learned here. Some of you will succeed, some of you will fail, and some of you," he paused, his eyes sweeping across the group, "some of you will discover capabilities you never knew you had." The scenario was brutal in its simplicity. Each candidate would be given a specific mission to complete in a mock urban environment populated with hostile forces played by experienced soldiers. They would have limited ammunition, no backup, and no second chances. Failure meant immediate dismissal from the program. Maria drew a challenging assignment. Neutralize 3 high-value targets located in different buildings across the mock city, then extract to a designated safe zone within 4 hours. The catch? She would be armed with the oldest, most unreliable rifle in the armory. As she stood in the equipment room, Maria stared at the weapon that had been assigned to her. The rifle was scratched, dented, and looked like it had seen action in every conflict since World War II. The scope was cracked, the trigger mechanism felt loose, and when she test-fired it during the brief familiarization period, the shots scattered across the target like confetti. "Something wrong with your weapon, Rodriguez?" asked Instructor Hayes, the same drill sergeant who had trained her at Fort Benning and had specifically requested to be part of this program. Maria hefted the rifle, feeling its weight and balance. "Nothing I can't work with, Drill Sergeant." Hayes smiled grimly. "That's what I wanted to hear. Remember, Rodriguez, it's not the weapon that makes the warrior. It's the warrior that makes the weapon." As Maria prepared for the exercise, she thought about her father's words about fixing things that everyone else had given up on. This rifle wasn't broken, she realized. It just needed someone who understood how to work with its limitations rather than against them. The mission began at 0400 hours. Before dawn, Maria studied the terrain from her insertion point, noting the patrol patterns of the opposing forces, the sight lines between buildings, and the natural cover provided by the urban environment. With a weapon she couldn't trust for long-distance shots, she would need to get close, very close. Her first target was located in a 3-story building guarded by a 2-man patrol. Maria observed their routine for 20 minutes, noting that they passed a particular alley every 8 minutes like clockwork. When they came by on their next pass, Maria was waiting. She took down both guards silently, using hand-to-hand combat techniques she had perfected during her basic training fights with Collins. The first guard never knew what hit him. The second managed to turn around just in time to see Maria's fist coming toward his face. Moving through the building, Maria used her unreliable rifle as a psychological weapon rather than a precision instrument. She would fire a shot from one window, miss deliberately but get close enough to send the defending forces scrambling for cover, then move to a different position and engage with close-quarters combat techniques. By the time she reached the first target, a mannequin dressed as an enemy commander, she had neutralized 6 opposing forces without firing a single accurate shot with her assigned weapon. Instead, she had used the rifle to create noise and distraction while relying on her physical training and tactical thinking to complete the objective. The second target proved more challenging. Located in a fortified position with multiple guards and overlapping fields of fire, it seemed impossible to approach without being detected. Maria spent an hour studying the building, looking for the kind of detail that her grandfather had taught her to notice. She found it in the building's ventilation system. Just like in the earlier exercise, there was a way in that bypassed the main defenses entirely. But this time, the shaft was smaller, barely large enough for her compact frame to navigate. It was a route that none of her larger male counterparts could have used. Crawling through the dusty ventilation system with her unreliable rifle strapped to her back, Maria thought about all the times people had seen her size as a weakness. Now it was her greatest asset. She emerged inside the target building like a ghost, neutralizing the surprised guards before they could react, and completing her second objective ahead of schedule. The third target was the most difficult, a sniper position on a rooftop with clear sightlines in all directions. The enemy marksman was played by one of the instructors, a man with 20 years of combat experience and a reputation for never missing a shot. Maria studied the situation from a concealed position 3 buildings away. A direct assault was impossible. The instructor had the high ground, superior equipment, and professional training. With her unreliable rifle, she couldn't match him in a straight shooting contest. But Maria hadn't survived this long by playing fair fights. Instead of trying to outshoot the sniper, she decided to outthink him. Using her broken rifle to create a series of deliberately poor shots from different positions, she convinced the instructor that she was a panicked, inexperienced shooter desperately trying to hit him from long range. The instructor, confident in his superiority, began taking more aggressive shots to try to eliminate what he saw as an easy target. Each time he fired, Maria noted the muzzle flash and began to plot his exact position. Then, using a piece of broken mirror she had found in one of the abandoned buildings, Maria reflected sunlight directly into the instructor's scope, temporarily blinding him. In the seconds while he was disoriented, she had already moved from her decoy position to a spot directly below his building. What happened next would be talked about in special operations training courses for years to come. Instead of trying to climb the building or find stairs, Maria used her rifle's sling to create an improvised rope system with debris from the street. She scaled the outside of the building in less than 2 minutes, appearing behind the instructor like a specter. "Target eliminated," she announced quietly, touching the barrel of her useless rifle to the back of the instructor's neck. The instructor turned around slowly, his expression a mixture of surprise and admiration. "But how the hell did you do that?" "I stopped trying to make the rifle work the way it was supposed to," Maria explained, "and started making it work the way I needed it to." The extraction to the safe zone was almost anticlimactic, after the intensity of the 3 target eliminations. Maria moved through the mock city like she owned it, avoiding patrols she could evade and neutralizing those she couldn't. She reached the extraction point with 47 minutes to spare. Colonel Morrison was waiting for her at the safe zone, along with Captain Williams and Drill Sergeant Hayes. Their expressions were unreadable. "Interesting approach, Rodriguez," Morrison said, taking the broken rifle from her hands. "You completed all 3 objectives without firing a single accurate shot with your assigned weapon." "Yes, sir," Maria replied, standing at attention. "Care to explain your reasoning?" Maria thought for a moment before answering. "Sir, I realized that the weapon wasn't the real test. The test was whether I could adapt to circumstances beyond my control and still accomplish the mission." Morrison nodded slowly. "And the other candidates?" "I don't know, sir. I was focused on my own mission. 11 of them failed," Morrison informed her. "They tried to force that broken rifle to work like a precision instrument, got frustrated when it didn't perform, and either gave up or made critical tactical errors. You were the only one who adapted." He paused, studying her face. "Congratulations, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. You've just earned yourself a spot in the most classified unit in the U.S. military. I hope you're ready for what comes next, because that little exercise you just completed, that was the easy part." As Maria stood there in the desert dawn, still covered in dust and sweat from her mission, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a girl who wouldn't back down on a Texas playground to a soldier who had just proven she could succeed where others failed. But Morrison's words echoed in her mind. If this was the easy part, what exactly had she just gotten herself into? The briefing room was unlike anything Maria had ever seen. Located 3 stories underground in a facility that officially didn't exist. The walls were lined with maps of countries she couldn't name and photographs of people she hoped never to meet in person. The air itself seemed to hum with secrets. Maria sat at a polished metal table with the 6 other candidates who had passed the final selection. Thompson, the former Marine, was there, along with Jackson, a former Army Ranger who moved like a predator, and Williams, an Air Force combat controller who spoke 4 languages and could pilot anything with wings. The others were similarly impressive. Davis, a former Navy SEAL who specialized in underwater operations, Chen, a former Green Beret with a doctorate in engineering, and Santos, a former Delta Force operator who looked like he could bench press a small car. At the head of the table sat a woman Maria had never seen before. She appeared to be in her 40s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe ponytail and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the room's occupants. Her uniform bore no insignia, no rank, no unit patches, nothing to indicate who she was or what authority she wielded. "My name is Commander Sarah Pierce," the woman began, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made everyone lean forward to listen. "For the next 6 months, I will be your instructor, your commanding officer, and quite possibly the person who determines whether you live or die in the field." She stood and began pacing behind the table, her movements precise and controlled. "Each of you has been selected not just for your individual skills, but for your ability to think beyond conventional tactics. What we're creating here has never been attempted before. A unit that can operate in any environment, against any enemy, under any circumstances." Commander Pierce pressed a button on the table, and the lights dimmed as a large screen descended from the ceiling. The first image that appeared was a satellite photograph of a compound in what looked like mountainous terrain. 3 weeks ago, Pierce continued, a team of 12 Navy SEALs attempted to infiltrate this facility to rescue 2 American hostages. The mission failed. All 12 operators were killed, and the hostages were moved to an unknown location. The next image showed the aftermath: burned vehicles, scattered equipment, and what Maria realized with a chill were body bags being loaded onto a helicopter. The traditional approach to special operations is built around overwhelming force and superior firepower. It works in most situations, but as our enemies become more sophisticated, we need operators who can succeed where conventional methods fail. Pierce turned to face the 7 candidates directly. "You are here to become those operators. You will learn to think like ghosts, move like shadows, and strike like lightning. You will become invisible when necessary and unstoppable when action is required." Jackson raised his hand. "Ma'am, what makes this unit different from existing special operations forces?" "Excellent question," Pierce replied. "Traditional special ops units are built around the idea that superior training and equipment can overcome any obstacle. We're going to teach you to succeed when you have inferior equipment, when the odds are impossible, and when failure means not just mission failure, but the deaths of innocent people." She clicked to the next slide, which showed a detailed breakdown of the training schedule ahead. Phase 1, Individual Skills Development. You will each specialize in a specific area while maintaining proficiency in all others. Rodriguez, based on your performance during selection, you'll be focusing on precision elimination. Maria felt her heart rate increase. She had suspected this was coming, but hearing it made it real. Phase 2, Team Integration. You will learn to function as a single unit despite your different specializations. Phase 3, Field Application. You will be deployed on actual missions under my direct supervision. Santos, the former Delta operator, spoke up. "Commander, what's our operational authority? Who do we report to?" Pierce smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. "Officially, this unit doesn't exist. You don't exist. Your families have been told you're participating in a classified training program of indefinite duration. If you die in the field, there will be no flag-draped coffin, no military funeral, no medals of honor." The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. However, Pierce continued, "If you succeed, you will be part of operations that save lives, prevent wars, and protect national security in ways that will never be publicized or acknowledged." Maria thought about her parents back in Texas, who believed she was attending an advanced training school in Virginia. They were proud but confused about why she couldn't tell them more details about what she was doing. "One last thing," Pierce said, her voice becoming even more serious. "The failure rate for this program is 90%. Not because the training is too difficult, but because most operators cannot adapt to thinking beyond their established patterns. Those who fail are transferred to other units with full honors and no negative marks on their records. Those who succeed become part of something that has never existed before." She looked at each of them in turn. "Anyone who wants to leave can do so now, no questions asked." No one moved. "Outstanding. Your training begins in 1 hour. Rodriguez, I'd like to speak with you privately." As the others filed out of the briefing room, Maria remained seated. trying to read Pierce's expression. "Do you know why you were selected for precision elimination?" Pierce asked once they were alone. "I assume because of my marksmanship scores, ma'am." "Partly," Pierce agreed, "but more importantly, because of how you handled that broken rifle during your final test. Most snipers are artists. They need perfect equipment, ideal conditions, and plenty of time to set up their shots. But in our line of work, you'll rarely have any of those luxuries." Pierce pulled out a tablet and showed Maria a series of photographs. They depicted urban environments, dense forests, crowded markets, and other locations where traditional sniper tactics would be impossible. "We need someone who can eliminate targets in situations where conventional wisdom says it can't be done. Someone who can adapt their methods to impossible circumstances and still achieve precision results." "I understand, ma'am." "I hope you do," Pierce said seriously, "because the people you'll be targeting aren't soldiers on a battlefield. They're terrorists hiding among civilians, enemy agents operating in friendly territory, and high-value targets who have every reason to believe they're untouchable." The training that followed was unlike anything Maria had ever experienced. While conventional sniper training focused on long-distance accuracy under controlled conditions, Pierce's program taught adaptive precision under chaotic circumstances. Maria learned to shoot accurately while rappelling down buildings, hanging upside down from helicopter landing skids, and even underwater using specialized equipment. She practiced making impossible shots through crowds of people, around obstacles that would confuse traditional scopes, and in weather conditions that would ground most military operations. But the most challenging aspect was psychological. Pierce brought in actors to play civilians, making it clear that Maria would need to be absolutely certain of her targets before firing. In one exercise, she had to identify and eliminate a terrorist in a crowd of hostages, with only seconds to confirm his identity and ensure no innocent people were in her line of fire. "The difference between a killer and a protector," Pierce explained after Maria successfully completed the exercise, "is precision. Not just in your aim, but in your judgment." As weeks turned into months, Maria began to understand what made this unit special. It wasn't just their individual skills, but their ability to function as a perfect team despite their different specializations. Jackson became their tactical genius, able to plan complex operations with multiple moving parts. Thompson specialized in infiltration and exfiltration, able to get the team in and out of impossible situations. Williams handled communications and technology, maintaining contact with command and dealing with enemy electronic countermeasures. Davis was their aquatic specialist, equally comfortable on or underwater. Chen became their technical expert, able to disable security systems, crack safes, and handle any mechanical challenge they might encounter. Santos was their close-quarters combat specialist, handling situations that required immediate, overwhelming force. And Maria became their ghost, the one who could eliminate threats from distances and angles that seemed impossible. Their first real mission came after 4 months of training. Pierce briefed them in the same underground room where their journey had begun. "Gentlemen, Rodriguez," she began, "you're going to Somalia." The mission details were stark in their simplicity. A group of pirates had captured a cargo ship carrying humanitarian aid destined for refugee camps. They were holding the crew hostage while demanding ransom payments from multiple governments. Previous rescue attempts by conventional forces had failed because the pirates had positioned themselves in a way that made traditional assault impossible. "The ship is anchored 2 miles offshore," Pierce explained, showing them satellite imagery. "The pirates have the crew locked in the ship's hold with explosives rigged to detonate if anyone approaches. They positioned lookouts at every possible approach angle, and they have patrol boats circling the ship." Chen studied the technical specifications. "What about the ship's structure? Any weak points we can exploit?" "That's where Rodriguez comes in," Pierce replied. "The pirate leader is named Osman Farah. He's been operating in these waters for 5 years, and he's extremely paranoid. He never exposes himself during daylight hours, and he changes his position regularly." She pulled up a detailed schematic of the cargo ship. "However, our intelligence suggests he has one weakness. Every evening at sunset, he goes to the ship's bridge to use a satellite phone to coordinate with his contacts on shore. For approximately 3 minutes, he's in a predictable location." Maria studied the satellite imagery, calculating angles and distances. "Ma'am, the bridge is over 2,000 yards from the nearest landmass. And with the ship moving on the waves, exactly, Pierce said with a slight smile. Impossible shot under impossible conditions, which is why you're here instead of a conventional sniper team. The insertion would be handled by Williams and Davis, using a submersible approach that would avoid the patrol boats. Thompson would coordinate their extraction, while Jackson and Santos provided security during the operation. Chen would handle the explosive devices once they were aboard, and Maria would make a shot that everyone agreed was impossible. As they prepared for the mission, Maria found herself thinking about her conversation with Pierce months earlier. This wasn't about perfect equipment or ideal conditions. This was about adapting to circumstances that would challenge everything she thought she knew about precision shooting. The night before they deployed, Pierce pulled Maria aside one final time. "I want you to understand something," Pierce said. "Tomorrow you're going to attempt something that has never been done before. A precision shot from a moving platform to a moving target over a distance that pushes the absolute limits of what's physically possible." "Yes, ma'am." "But that's not why you're here," Pierce continued. "You're here because when that broken rifle was handed to you during selection, you didn't try to force it to work the way it was supposed to. You found a way to make it work the way you needed it to." Pierce paused, studying Maria's face. "Tomorrow, you're going to be handed another impossible situation. And I have complete confidence that you'll find a way to make it work." As Maria packed her equipment that night, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a playground in Texas where she learned never to back down, to a secret facility where she was training to do the impossible. Tomorrow she would find out if impossible was just another word for difficult, or if some challenges were truly beyond human capability. Either way, she was ready to find out. The Somali coast at dawn looked like something from another planet. Maria lay prone on a rocky outcropping, her rifle assembled and calibrated, watching the captured cargo ship through her scope as it rode the swells 2,000 yards offshore. The morning air was already thick with humidity, and heat distortions were beginning to rise from the sun-baked rocks around her position. Through her earpiece, she could hear the calm voices of her teammates as they moved into position. Davis and Williams had successfully approached the ship underwater and were now attached to its hull, waiting for the signal to begin their ascent. Thompson was coordinating from a concealed position inland, ready to guide them to the extraction point once the mission was complete. Jackson and Santos were positioned to provide covering fire if things went wrong, and Chen was already aboard the ship, having climbed up through the anchor chain housing in a feat of engineering and athleticism that still amazed Maria. His voice crackled through the communication system as he reported his status. "Explosives located and neutralized," he whispered. "Hostages are secure in the hold, but I count 12 tangos moving around the deck. They're armed with automatic weapons and they're nervous." Commander Pierce's voice came through from the command center, thousands of miles away. "Rodriguez, what's your assessment of the target area?" Maria adjusted her scope, studying the ship's bridge through the powerful optics. "The structure is moving approximately 6 feet vertically with the wave action, ma'am. Horizontal movement is less predictable due to wind and current. I can see movement inside the bridge, but I don't have positive identification on the target yet." "Understood. Continue observation." Maria had been watching the ship for over an hour, and she was beginning to understand its rhythm. The cargo vessel was old and heavy, which made its movements more predictable than a smaller boat would have been. It rose and fell with the swells in a pattern that, while not perfectly regular, had a certain cadence to it. But the distance was the real challenge. At over 2,000 yards, she was operating at the extreme edge of what was physically possible with her equipment. The bullet would take nearly 3 seconds to reach the target, during which time the ship would move, the wind would shift, and a dozen other variables could send her shot wide of the mark. "Movement on the bridge," Chen reported. "I can see someone approaching the communication equipment." Maria focused her scope on the bridge windows, adjusting for the morning light that was starting to reflect off the glass. Through the glare, she could see a figure moving inside the enclosed area. "I have movement," Maria confirmed, "but I need positive ID before I can engage." The figure moved closer to the window, and Maria felt her breath catch. Even at this distance, even through the scope distortions and the heat haze, she could see that it was definitely Osman Farah. The intelligence photographs had been accurate. Tall, thin, with the distinctive scar across his left cheek from a knife fight years earlier. "Target confirmed," Maria reported. Osman Farah is on the bridge, moving toward the communication station. You are clear to engage, Pierce responded immediately. Take the shot when ready. But Maria hesitated. Something wasn't right about the shot presentation. Farah was moving in an erratic pattern, stepping behind equipment, then reappearing in a different location. He was being careful, probably from years of experience avoiding government snipers. Negative on the shot, Maria reported. Target is not presenting a clean opportunity. Too much movement, too many obstructions. She watched through her scope as Farah continued to move around the bridge, never staying in one position long enough for her to establish the precise calculations needed for such an extreme range shot. Then she heard something that changed everything. Jackson's voice came through the earpiece, tight with tension. We have a problem. Patrol boat approaching from the south, approximately 10 minutes out. If they spot our insertion team. Maria realized that time had just become her enemy. If the patrol boat discovered Davis and Williams, the mission would collapse into a chaotic firefight with the hostages caught in the middle. She needed to take the shot now, regardless of the conditions. Rodriguez, Pierce's voice was calm but urgent. What's your status? Maria studied the target area through her scope, watching Farah's movement pattern. He was being cautious, but he was also human. Humans had habits even when they were trying to be unpredictable. Give me 30 seconds, Maria replied. I think I can predict his movement pattern. She watched Farah carefully, noting that he moved from the communication equipment to a position near the right window, then to a chart table in the center of the bridge, then back to the communication equipment. It wasn't perfectly regular, but there was a pattern there. More importantly, there was one moment in the pattern when Farah paused at the chart table, probably to verify their position or check navigation data. It was only for a few seconds, but it was the only time he was completely stationary. Target will be stationary at the chart table in approximately 20 seconds, Maria reported. I'll have a 3-second window. The mathematics of the shot were staggering. She had to account for bullet drop over the extreme distance, the movement of the ship on multiple axes, wind speed and direction at her position and at various points along the bullet's trajectory, temperature and humidity effects on the bullet's flight characteristics, and the rotation of the Earth itself. But most challenging was the fact that she had to predict exactly where the target would be 3 seconds in the future, because that's how long the bullet would take to reach the ship. Maria made her final calculations, adjusted her scope for the conditions, and settled into her shooting position. Through the earpiece, she could hear the tension in her teammates' voices as they waited for her signal. Patrol boat is 8 minutes out, Jackson reported. Rodriguez, whenever you're ready, Pierce said quietly. Maria watched Farah move from the communication equipment toward the chart table. Based on his previous pattern, he would pause there for approximately 3 seconds before moving to the window position. She controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate slow as she entered the focused state that she had trained for months to achieve. The world narrowed to just her, the rifle, and the target area visible through her scope. Farah approached the chart table. Maria began her trigger pull, applying steady pressure as she had been trained. Farah reached the chart table and paused, leaning over what appeared to be navigation charts. Maria completed her trigger pull, feeling the rifle recoil against her shoulder as the bullet began its 3-second journey across the water. For those 3 seconds, time seemed suspended. Maria watched through her scope as the ship continued its movement on the swells as Farah remained bent over the charts as her bullet flew through the morning air at over 2,800 feet per second. Then, through her scope, she saw Farah suddenly straighten and take a step backward, directly into the path of her incoming bullet. The impact was instantaneous and final. Farah collapsed out of sight, and chaos erupted on the ship's deck as the other pirates realized their leader was down. Target down, Maria reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Confirmed, Chen replied from his position on the ship. Tango down, remaining hostiles are in disarray. The rest of the mission unfolded like a perfectly choreographed dance. With their leader eliminated, the remaining pirates were confused and disorganized. Davis and Williams ascended to the ship's deck and began neutralizing threats while Chen guided the hostages to safety. Santos and Jackson provided covering fire from their positions, preventing the patrol boat from interfering with the extraction. Within 20 minutes, all hostages were safe, all pirates were neutralized or captured, and the team was moving toward their extraction point. But as Maria packed up her rifle and prepared to move out, she realized something that would haunt her for days afterward. Her shot had been perfect, exactly where she had aimed based on Farah's established pattern. But Farah had moved at the last second, stepping directly into the bullet's path. It was as if the universe itself had conspired to make the impossible shot possible. During the debrief back at the facility, Commander Pierce reviewed the mission footage with clinical precision. "Outstanding work, all of you," she said, but her eyes were on Maria. "Rodriguez, that shot will be studied in advanced marksmanship courses for years to come. The combination of distance, conditions, and timing made it theoretically impossible." "Ma'am," Maria said carefully, "I need to report that the target moved unexpectedly. My shot was aimed at his original position." Pierce nodded. "I know. I watched the footage. You aimed where he was supposed to be, but he moved into the bullet's path at the exact moment necessary for the shot to succeed." She paused, studying Maria's expression. "Some people would call that luck. I call it the mark of an operator who is trained so thoroughly that even their mistakes become successes." Thompson, who had been quiet during the debrief, spoke up. "With respect, ma'am, that shot was impossible. No one could have calculated all those variables accurately enough to guarantee success." Pierce smiled. "You're absolutely right, Thompson. It was impossible. Which is exactly why Rodriguez was the only person in the world who could have made it." That night, alone in her quarters, Maria thought about Pierce's words. She had trained for months to make impossible shots, to adapt to circumstances that would defeat conventional thinking. But this mission had taught her something more profound. Sometimes success wasn't about overcoming impossible odds. Sometimes it was about putting yourself in a position where impossible odds could work in your favor. Her father had told her that everything could be fixed if you knew where to look and were willing to put in the work. But he had never mentioned that sometimes the fix came from unexpected directions. The broken rifle during her selection test had taught her to adapt her methods to imperfect equipment. The impossible shot in Somalia had taught her that adaptation could create opportunities that didn't exist in the original plan. As Maria prepared for sleep, she wondered what other impossible situations awaited her in the missions to come. But she was no longer intimidated by the idea of impossible. After all, she had just proven that impossible was just another word for challenging. The next morning, Pierce called her into the briefing room alone. "Rodriguez," she said, "I have news. Based on your performance in Somalia, you've been selected for our most classified program. It's called Deep Strike, and it involves operations that are even more sensitive than what we've been doing here." Maria felt a familiar flutter of anticipation. "What kind of operations, ma'am?" "The kind where failure isn't just mission failure," Pierce replied seriously. "It's the kind of failure that starts wars, topples governments, and gets innocent people killed on a massive scale." She handed Maria a sealed folder. "Your next assignment is in Eastern Europe. The target is a man who officially doesn't exist, operating in a country that officially isn't harboring him. You'll be working alone, with no backup, no support, and no possibility of rescue if things go wrong." Maria took the folder, feeling its weight in her hands. "Ma'am," she said, "what makes you think I can succeed where others might fail?" Pierce smiled, but it was an expression that carried the weight of experience and hard-won wisdom. "Because, Rodriguez, you've already proven that you can make the impossible look easy. Now we need to find out if you can make the easy look inevitable." As Maria left the briefing room with her new assignment, she realized that her journey was far from over. In fact, she suspected it was just beginning. But she was ready for whatever came next. After all, she was Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez from Laredo, Texas, and she had never backed down from a challenge in her life, even when that challenge defied the laws of physics. 5 years later, Maria Rodriguez sat in a congressional hearing room, wearing her dress uniform adorned with commendations that officially didn't exist for missions that had never happened. The room was closed to the public, the senators had been sworn to secrecy, and the court reporter had been cleared for the highest levels of classified information. At 32, Maria looked different from the young woman who had first challenged Tommy Martinez on a Texas playground. Her face carried the quiet confidence of someone who had seen impossible situations and found ways to make them possible. Her eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had looked through rifle scopes at targets that others deemed unreachable. But most importantly, She carried herself with the dignity of someone who had proven that limitations were often just failures of imagination. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," began Senator Williams, the chairwoman of the committee, "thank you for appearing before this classified session. We understand that discussing your service record requires the highest levels of discretion." "Yes, ma'am," Maria replied. "I'm honored to be here." The past 5 years had been a whirlwind of operations that pushed the boundaries of what Special Operations Forces could accomplish. After Somalia, Maria had been deployed to locations that couldn't be named, against targets that couldn't be acknowledged, in situations that couldn't be reported. There was the mission in Eastern Europe where she had eliminated a war criminal from a distance of nearly 3,000 yards in a blizzard that grounded all aircraft and made conventional operations impossible. She had used a rifle that had been deliberately sabotaged by enemy agents, forcing her to compensate for mechanical problems while making a shot that military experts later said violated several laws of physics. There was the operation in Southeast Asia, where she had prevented a terrorist attack by eliminating 3 targets simultaneously from different positions, moving between shots faster than anyone thought possible, and using urban terrain in ways that redefined tactical thinking. And there was the mission that had brought her to this hearing room. An operation in the Middle East where she had single-handedly prevented what intelligence analysts later determined would have been a regional war, involving multiple nations and millions of casualties. "Sergeant Rodriguez," continued Senator Martinez, reading from classified documents, "according to the briefing materials, you have successfully completed 47 high-priority missions over the past 5 years, with a success rate that military analysts describe as unprecedented in the history of special operations. I've been fortunate to work with exceptional teams, sir." Senator Martinez smiled. "The reports indicate that 32 of those missions were solo operations where you had no team support whatsoever." "Yes, sir." Senator Johnson, a former Marine himself, leaned forward. "Sergeant, help us understand something. According to these reports, you've succeeded in situations where previous operations by larger, more heavily equipped forces have failed. What makes the difference?" Maria considered the question carefully. It was one she had been asked many times over the years by military leaders trying to understand how to replicate her success. "Sir, I think the difference is that most military operations are planned around the assumption that superior force and equipment will overcome obstacles. My training taught me to succeed when I don't have superior force or equipment. Can you elaborate on that?"
"Well, sir, if you expect to have perfect conditions, then imperfect conditions become a crisis."
"But if you train for imperfect conditions, then perfect conditions become an unexpected advantage." Senator Williams nodded thoughtfully. "The committee has received testimony from military leadership requesting that your training methods be incorporated into standard special operations curricula. They want to create an entire generation of operators trained in what they're calling adaptive precision tactics." "That sounds like an excellent idea, ma'am." However, Senator Johnson interjected, "There's been some debate about whether your methods can be taught to others, or whether your success is the result of unique personal characteristics." This was the heart of the matter, and Maria had known this question would eventually arise. Over the years, several attempts had been made to train other operators using her methods, with mixed results. Some had succeeded admirably, while others had struggled to adapt to the psychological demands of operating without conventional advantages. "Sir, I believe anyone can learn these methods if they're willing to change how they think about problems. The challenge isn't the physical training or the technical skills. The challenge is learning to see obstacles as opportunities and limitations as creative constraints." Commander Pierce, who had been sitting quietly at the side of the room, spoke up with the committee's permission. "If I may, Senators, I've observed Sergeant Rodriguez's development over the past 6 years. What makes her exceptional isn't superhuman ability, it's her willingness to approach every situation as if conventional wisdom might be wrong." Pierce stood and moved to a presentation screen. "Traditional military thinking teaches us to overcome obstacles through superior force. Rodriguez's approach teaches us to work with obstacles, to find ways they can become advantages." When she was given a broken rifle during her initial selection, most candidates tried to force it to work normally. Rodriguez found a way to make it work differently. Senator Martinez looked at the classified mission summaries. These reports describe operations that seem almost fictional. Shots made under conditions that experts say should have been impossible. How do you respond to suggestions that some of these accounts have been exaggerated? Maria smiled slightly. Sir, I'd invite any expert who doubts those reports to accompany me on my next training exercise. I'm happy to demonstrate any technique they'd like to observe. And if they still insist it's impossible, then I'd respectfully suggest that their definition of impossible might need updating. The hearing continued for several more hours, with senators asking detailed questions about specific missions, training methods, and the potential for expanding these techniques throughout the military. But Maria's mind kept drifting back to the journey that had brought her here. She thought about her father, who had taught her that everything could be fixed if you knew where to look. He had passed away 2 years earlier, but not before seeing his daughter receive the Medal of Honor in a ceremony so classified that only 12 people attended. He had been proud but not surprised. He had always known she would find a way to overcome any obstacle. She thought about her mother, who had initially worried about her daughter's choice to join the military, but now bragged to everyone in Laredo about her daughter's important work in the Army, even though she couldn't provide any details. She thought about Drill Sergeant Hayes, who had pushed her harder than anyone else because he recognized her potential. He had retired the previous year and sent her a letter saying that watching her succeed had been the highlight of his military career. Most of all, she thought about all the young women who would come after her, who would face the same doubts and limitations that she had encountered. The difference was that now there was proof that those limitations could be overcome. As the hearing concluded, Senator Williams asked one final question. Sergeant Rodriguez, what would you say to young people, particularly young women, who are considering military service but worry that they might not be strong enough or tough enough to succeed in combat roles? Maria stood at attention as she considered her answer. Ma'am, I would tell them that strength isn't just about how much weight you can lift or how fast you can run. Strength is about how you respond when things don't go according to plan. Toughness isn't about how much punishment you can absorb. Toughness is about how quickly you can adapt when your original approach doesn't work. She paused, thinking about the young woman she had been when she first walked into that recruitment office in Laredo. I would tell them that the military doesn't need them to be perfect. It needs them to be willing to learn, willing to adapt, and willing to keep trying even when everyone else thinks the situation is hopeless. And if they're told they're not cut out for combat roles? Maria smiled, remembering Tommy Martinez in the monkey bars, remembering the broken rifle and the impossible shot. Then I'd tell them that sometimes the people who say you're not cut out for something are actually telling you that you're going to do it differently than they would. And sometimes, doing it differently is exactly what the situation requires. After the hearing, Commander Pierce walked with Maria through the Pentagon's corridors toward the exit. So, Pierce said, what's next for the legendary Maria Rodriguez? Actually, ma'am, I've been thinking about that. I've had an offer to join the instructor staff at the Special Operations Training Center. They want me to help develop the new adaptive tactics curriculum, teaching the next generation of impossible shot artists. Maria laughed. Something like that. Though I prefer to think of them as students who are learning that impossible is just another word for challenging. Pierce nodded approvingly. I think you'll be an excellent instructor. You have a gift for helping people see beyond their limitations. As they reached the Pentagon's main entrance, Pierce stopped and turned to face Maria. You know, when I first met you, I saw someone who was clearly talented but unproven. Over the years, I've watched you redefine what's possible for Special Operations Forces. But I think your greatest achievement isn't the missions you've completed. What is it then, ma'am? Your greatest achievement is proving that excellence doesn't require perfect conditions, that success doesn't require superior resources, that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in any arsenal is an operator who refuses to accept that something can't be done. 6 months later, Maria stood in front of a new class of special operations candidates at the training facility, where her own journey had begun. The students were a diverse group, men and women, experienced operators and recent graduates. People from every branch of the military and every background imaginable. At the back of the classroom sat a young woman who reminded Maria of herself at that age. She was small, determined, and had the kind of fire in her eyes that suggested she had something to prove. My name is Instructor Rodriguez, Maria began, and over the next 6 months I'm going to teach you to succeed in situations where conventional wisdom says success is impossible. She picked up a rifle from the table at the front of the room. It was old, scratched, and obviously damaged, the same type of weapon that had been handed to her during her own selection process years earlier. "Can anyone tell me what's wrong with this weapon?" she asked. Several students raised their hands, pointing out the obvious flaws and mechanical problems. "Good observations," Maria said. "Now, can anyone tell me how you would use this weapon to make an accurate shot at a target 1,000 yards away?" The students looked at each other uncertainly. Finally, the young woman in the back raised her hand. "Ma'am, I think the question isn't how to make the weapon work perfectly. The question is how to work with the weapon's limitations to achieve the desired result." Maria smiled. "Excellent answer. What's your name?" "Private Jessica Chen, ma'am." "Well, Private Chen, I think you're going to do very well in this program." As Maria began her first lesson, teaching the next generation of operators to see obstacles as opportunities and limitations as creative constraints, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a playground in Texas where she learned never to back down, to a congressional hearing room where she testified about redefining the possible, to a classroom where she was now teaching others to do the same. The broken rifle that had once been handed to her as a test had become a symbol of something more profound. It represented the idea that sometimes the most powerful weapons weren't the newest or the most advanced. Sometimes the most powerful weapon was simply someone who refused to accept that the mission couldn't be accomplished. Maria Rodriguez had proven that impossible was just another word for challenging. Now she was going to teach others to prove it too. And somewhere in Texas, in a small auto repair shop, Miguel Rodriguez smiled as he worked on an old car that everyone else had given up on. His daughter had learned his lesson well. Everything could be fixed if you knew where to look and were willing to put in the work. Even the word impossible.